So Shauna Rubley was shocked by her therapist's advice given in her second session, but the counselor was recommended by someone she knew and had impressive credentials, so she did as she was told. She cut off all ties with her mother. It was an argument made from authority, so I followed it, says the 42-year-old freelance marketer. Is it really good therapy to break your mother's heart? My question is it really good parenting to break your children's heart? As someone who grew up in a household with a single parent and one other sibling for a majority of my childhood, I never thought there would come a time where I wanted to be estranged or even like away from my mother. When I was younger, a lot of the best memories I have were with my mom, like super young, you know. But over the years, things got messy, to say the least. There was a lot of turmoil in the household. Some directed at me, some not. A lot of abuse, emotional and physical. And as I grew older, I started to realize that my mother's dysfunction was out of hand. There was this feeling of wanting to be away from her, and there was also this feeling on her side of her wanting me to be away from her. But at the same time, there was always that like control that, oh, you can go, but can't go too far off. You know, regardless of whatever has happened between me and my mother, I will always be eternally grateful for the love she has given me and the basic care that a parent should give a child, because some people don't get that, and I have to acknowledge that. However, it's basic. You know, being clothed and fed and kept out of harm's way should just be the baseline for parenting. And, you know, in the case of like a lot of our mothers and fathers, especially those of us who are millennials and younger, we find that our parents just were not equipped to deal with emotional regularity and emotional issues in general. And, you know, some of us had to deal with the wrath of their trauma for years and years and years without any reprieve. So when I read an article like this, I just like, even the first couple words of, you know, in the second session, the counselor advised her to essentially, you know, not stop talking to her mom. I don't know what therapist worth their salt would do something like that. I mean, 2 sessions, right? That's give or take 2 hours for most therapy sessions. Like, you can't condense 2 hours of a long life relationship in 2 hours. 5 hours, 10 hours even. I just don't know what therapist who has studied, you know, relationships, love, family dynamics, who in their right mind would tell their child, like an adult child, hey, this is decisions you should be making. And yeah, I know there are some therapists out there that are not the greatest, but I believe the goal of therapy should always be putting the power back into the client's hands and making them, empowering them and giving them the tools to make the decisions that are best for them, not doing something based on, you know, your very sound and educated advice. People's lives are complicated, and I just, for some reason, I just don't believe that actually ever happened. Not at least in the way that it's being presented in this article. I mean, regardless of what I went through with my mom, and we've been through a lot, I find myself always going back to her. And I've done it a few times where I've said, this is it. This is the boiling point. I need my space. I don't ever want to see you again. And there has been times where she's told me the same. I think, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, we're very similar. And similar in the sense that neither of us want to back down when we feel hurt. For me, I consider myself to be a very emotionally aware person, emotionally intelligent person. And whenever I've had arguments or confrontations with my mother, I always try to be the grown-up, the one who doesn't go immediately to anger. Try to talk it out, try to explain my side of the story. And every time I was met with dismissiveness or anger. And the older I got, I realized that I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want to be the bigger person, as I just knew it was going to break my heart trying to be soft and malleable to her rage. And it hardened me a lot. And in a lot of ways, I found myself, even when I wasn't in her presence, saying and doing things that she did. Not just to me, but to other people. And that was very shocking for me to realize. We're both very hot-headed in the sense that my mom has a short fuse, but I have a little bit of a longer one, I think. And we're both very, not argumentative, but, when we're in a mood, sometimes it doesn't clash very well. Later on in the article, there's a quote from a therapist who says, "It should be a tragic exception that you cut off a parent or a loved one, not business as usual in therapy." Who's to say what should be business as usual in therapy? I mean, if the past generation had raised, their children to be inadequate parents, and why should we as the future generation take the brunt of that? I think it's a very millennial thing to be self-centered or be perceived as being self-centered by other generations, like before and the ones after. I think that came from watching the older generations, bust their ass, but then kind of come home and complain about their lives all the time. My mom was constantly complaining about how this wasn't the life she wanted, and if she hadn't had me, where she would be and what she would be doing. And I just saw the things that she put up with, and I thought, I'm never going to put up with that stuff. Even now, we're talking again, and she's asking me, when am I going to have kids? And I'm just like, I'm not going to have kids until I know I'm ready to have children. But in her mind, it's like kind of selfish for me to even do that. In their eyes, in the older generation, they see it as self-sacrifice. And that's what they see like a boundary as, is self-sacrificing. And for my generation, as millennials and younger, we kind of see it as self-preservation, to be estranged from our parents. I mean, I wouldn't want to convince anyone that they should cut off their parents. I think it's something obviously that should be taken into deep consideration. And to be honest, I don't think most people on this planet would love to have a great relationship with their parent, regardless of how terrible their parents are. Um, it's just a matter of when have you had enough? Why shouldn't you be allowed to live your life for yourself? When is enough enough? As a peer, I don't necessarily work with people on such a clinical level of, sharing scientific data, or I just basically kind of give my experiences. And, a lot of the clients I work with, they always have a problem with their parents. I've never had a client who's like, I had a great relationship with my mother, a great relationship with my father. You know, it's always very similar to my story. And for the people who are clearly grappling with this idea of like, should they give their parents another chance, I always tell them, it's your life. You do what you feel is best. In some circumstances, I say what they did was not fair and that was abuse, or I see that as abuse, or I know how that would make me feel. Or how do you feel about that? But it's not an easy thing. Even if you do it, it's not an easy thing. As human beings, we're pack animals. We are social creatures, and I think we like to compare ourselves a lot to the people who are around us. And even when you're in a family and it's a toxic dynamic, you look at other healthier families and you think, wow, I wish that's what I had. Even as I got older, in my mid to late 20s, I had to come to the reckoning of like, I will never have a childhood with perfect parents. I didn't have a father growing up, and did have a stepfather, but he was, abusive. He abandoned the family. So, I'd always knew that I was never going to get the father figure that I might have deserved. But with my mother, I always held out hope in a way. I think we should just let people do what they want to do. I don't know if I believe in karma, but I do believe that if you do something to someone for long enough, they're not going to want to take it anymore, regardless if they have any language of like what a boundary is, or what they want to, like what fantasy they have in their head of you. Eventually the illusion will break. Might take months, years, decades, but eventually it will just cease to exist, and it can't be upheld. It's very interesting because in this article, the patient says something to the effect of, I went to therapy expecting to focus on boundaries, and I thought that meant better self-discipline and better communication. The main goal of therapy, trying to improve yourself, but at the same time, like, no amount of self-discipline on your end and no amount of better communication on your end, or handling of your emotions, or dampening of your emotions, or expression of your emotions, is gonna change someone. And a lot of us too, we have parents that are much older, and you know what they say about teaching an old dog new tricks. So, I mean, I don't know. That's just my thoughts on it. I will say death. Like, I've always heard, like, you don't want to abandon your parents because they're going to die one day and you're going to regret not ever seeing them or trying with them. And I agree with that. You should try. You should try to come to some kind of, a balance or agreement if you can speak with your parents, but some of us can't. And I think the feeling that a lot of people get when their parents die and that there was nothing they could do was that they just straight up went to cut them off and never tried to really understand them, their parents, in any way, shape, or form. Which again is, but we're talking about in the sense of like the emotional hit that would have for the parent, for the child, for the adult child. And I think the way you can mitigate that is by doing everything you can in your power to see your parents for who they are and what they've done and how they make you feel in the present as well. And to be brave and to stand up for, even your past self who was harmed by your parent. They die, and then you have all these aggressive things you wanted to say or you wish you could have said, and it will never happen. I think when my mother passes eventually, I'll be okay with that fact, even if we're not talking or we are talking. Because for me, the reality of the situation is, if not for my mother, I would not be alive. My father didn't want me, but my mother, for whatever reasons she might have had, good or bad intentions, I was born and I was given this life, and I've experienced some good things in it, and I couldn't have experienced those good things if not for her giving birth to me. So I try, in the sense of honoring that. That's like what's keeping me going now. And also things are good. I feel if things got bad again, I would just stop talking to her again. And if I felt like I wanted to talk to her again, I would just talk to her again. The very sad thing about it is that my mother also has like a very good knowledge of what boundaries are and how to implement them. Like, her own childhood trauma and stuff, I'm sure. Though I don't think she would see it that way at all. I try to give myself grace, try to give my mother grace. That's all we can do. Just remember, at the end of the day, no matter what you decide to do, it's your life. Don't live it for an audience that writes an article asking you if it's okay to cut off your parents. Live your life for you. Do what's best for you.